My sister has always been the favorite daughter, but when I succeeded, me with an iron rod, my ribs and arm. Hi, Reddit. I am here to pour out a bit of my life story. I guess I need some advocacy. Maybe I just need to vent. Anyway, here it goes. I grew up in a family where I always felt like an afterthought. My parents, let us call them Susan and John, were always busy with their careers. Dad was a lawyer and Mom was a business consultant. They were rarely home, and when they were, they seemed more interested in their phones or laptops than in me. I have this vivid memory of my 5th birthday. I was so excited because I thought maybe they'd take the day off and we'd go to the zoo or something. Instead, they handed me a toy car and went back to their work calls. That toy car sat in a corner untouched for years, a reminder of that day. School wasn't much better. From a young age, I was different. I was that quiet kid in the corner who didn't quite fit in. I remember in 3rd grade, there was this one kid, Timmy, who made it his life's mission to make mine miserable. He'd steal my lunch, hide my backpack, and call me names. The teachers were indifferent at best. I remember Mrs. Harris, our homeroom teacher, catching Timmy red-handed once, but she just shrugged it off with a boys will be boys comment. It made me feel so invisible. Things didn't get better as I got older. Middle school was a nightmare. Puberty hit, and I was awkward with braces and glasses. The bullying escalated. There was this one incident in 7th grade that still haunts me. During gym class, some kids thought it would be hilarious to lock me in the locker room. I was stuck there for hours until the janitor found me. I missed all my classes that day, and no one even noticed I was gone. Home was no sanctuary either. My parents, who were supposed to be my refuge, were emotionally unavailable. Whenever I tried to talk about school or my feelings, they'd dismiss me with, "You're just being dramatic," or "Toughen up, life isn't fair." It was like screaming into a void. One summer, when I was about 10, my parents decided they needed a break from me. Or maybe I needed a break from them, who knows? They shipped me off to my grandparents' house for the entire summer. Now, don't get me wrong, I loved my grandparents, but they were old and set in their ways. Grandpa was grumpy and strict, while Grandma was always fretting over something. Their idea of a good summer was making me read old books and do chores around the house. Their house was in the middle of nowhere, and they didn't allow me to go outside much. Too dangerous, Grandpa would say. So, my summer was spent in their dusty old house, feeling like a prisoner. The only escape was my imagination, but even that started to feel like a cage after a while. High school came around, and things didn't improve. I tried to reinvent myself, but the damage was done. I was still that awkward kid with no friends. I remember once, during sophomore year, I mustered up the courage to ask a girl, Emily, to the school dance. She laughed in my face and told everyone about it. The humiliation was unbearable. Despite everything, I managed to keep my grades up. I guess burying myself in books was a way to escape the reality around me. When it came time to apply for college, I was determined to get into a good university and finally get away from everything. I got accepted into a decent university, and for a moment I thought things would change. But university was a whole new battlefield. My social anxiety was through the roof. I tried to make friends, join clubs, and be more outgoing, but it felt like everyone saw right through me. I remember my first day in the dorms, my roommate Jake was this outgoing, charismatic guy. He had a group of friends within hours, while I sat there pretending to be busy unpacking. Classes were tough, too. I felt like I was always playing catch-up. The stress was overwhelming. There was this one professor, Dr. Stevens, who seemed to take pleasure in making students feel small. I remember handing in a paper I had worked so hard on, only to have him rip it apart in front of the entire class. "This is barely college-level work," he said, handing it back to me with a condescending smirk. The pressure built up, and I started having panic attacks. I'd lie in bed, unable to breathe, feeling like the walls were closing in. I tried talking to my parents about it, hoping for some support, but they brushed it off again. "It's just stress. You'll get over it," Mom said. Dad's advice was even worse. "Man up. You are in college now." One night, it all became too much. I was sitting in my dorm room, staring at a bottle of pills, wondering if it would just be easier to end it all. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the thought of proving everyone wrong, or maybe it was just the fear of the unknown. I don't know. But I put the bottle away and decided to keep going. Update: Thanks for the support and kind words from my last post. I wanted to give you an update on how things have been going. After that dark night in my dorm room, I realized I couldn't do this alone. I needed help. I reached out to the campus counseling center and started therapy. My therapist, Dr. Emily Foster, was a godsend. She was patient, understanding, and genuinely cared about helping me. It wasn't easy opening up about my past, but she made me feel safe. The first few sessions were tough. I cried a lot, which was something I hadn't allowed myself to do in years. We delved into my childhood, the neglect from my parents, the bullying at school, and the isolation I felt at university. Dr. Foster helped me understand that my feelings were valid and that I wasn't alone. She taught me coping mechanisms to deal with my anxiety and panic attacks. Slowly, I started to feel a bit of the weight lift off my shoulders. After about 5 months of therapy, I began to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I was still attending classes and doing my best to keep up with the workload, but I also made time for self-care. I started journaling, meditating, and even picked up painting as a hobby. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was in control of my life. Graduation came around, and I was proud of myself. I had made it through despite everything. I landed a job at a tech startup, a company called Innovate Tech, which was exactly the kind of environment I needed. It was dynamic, fast-paced, and full of creative minds. My role was in product development, and I loved the challenge of coming up with new ideas and solutions. I threw myself into my work, and it paid off. Within 2 years, I had climbed up the career ladder quickly. I went from being a junior developer to a team lead, and eventually I was promoted to a managerial position. It felt surreal to have people looking up to me, considering where I had started. Around the same time, I decided to take better care of my physical health as well. I joined a gym near my apartment and started working out regularly. It was tough at first. I was out of shape and self-conscious. But I met a group of people who became my gym buddies. They were supportive and encouraging, and we quickly became friends. One of those friends, Mike, was particularly influential. He was this big, burly guy with a heart of gold. He had a background in business and had always dreamed of starting his own company. We bonded over our shared love for fitness and technology, and one day, he pitched an idea to me. He wanted to start a fitness tech company that developed smart gym equipment and apps. It sounded like a crazy idea at first, but the more we talked about it, the more it made sense. We started small, working on prototypes in our spare time. We called our company FitTech. The initial months were challenging. We were juggling our full-time jobs and our startup. But the hard work paid off. We managed to secure some seed funding and things started to take off. Our first product was a smart dumbbell that tracked your reps, sets, and even your form. It was a hit among fitness enthusiasts. We followed it up with an app that provided personalized workout plans and tracked progress. Our user base grew rapidly, and soon we had a small but dedicated team working with us. As FitTech grew, so did my confidence. I felt like I had finally found my place in the world. The success of our business was exhilarating, but it was the sense of purpose that really made a difference. I was no longer that scared, lonely kid. I was building something meaningful, surrounded by people who believed in me, but life has a way of throwing curveballs. One day, out of the blue, I received a call from my mom. She sounded different, more vulnerable than I had ever heard her. She told me that Dad had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's. It was a shock. Despite everything, they were still my parents, and the news hit me hard. I flew back home to see them. Seeing my dad, who had always been this strong, authoritative figure, so frail and confused, was heartbreaking. My mom was struggling too, trying to cope with his rapid decline. For the first time, she seemed to truly see me and my pain. We had a long, tearful conversation, and she apologized for not being there for me when I needed them the most. It wasn't an instant fix, but it was a start. I decided to take a leave of absence from FitTech to help my mom take care of my dad. It was tough, but it also gave me a chance to mend some of the broken pieces of our relationship. My dad had moments of clarity where he recognized me, and in those moments, I saw a flicker of the man he used to be. Back at FitTech, Mike and the team were incredibly supportive. They took on more responsibilities, ensuring that the business continued to thrive in my absence. It reinforced the sense of community we had built. I was grateful for their understanding and support during such a difficult time. Months passed, and my dad's condition worsened. It was a painful journey, but it brought our family closer together in ways I never thought possible. My mom and I found a new rhythm, working together to make my dad's last days as comfortable as possible. When he passed away, it was a mix of grief and relief. He was no longer suffering, and we had found some semblance of peace. Returning to FitTech after my dad's passing was bittersweet. The team welcomed me back with open arms, and I threw myself into work once again. We had new products in the pipeline and exciting partnerships on the horizon. The business was thriving, and it felt good to be back in the driver's seat. But the experience with my dad changed me. It made me more empathetic, more aware of the fragility of life. I started a wellness initiative at FitTech, ensuring that our employees had access to mental health resources and support. It was my way of giving back, of making sure that no one in our team ever felt as alone as I once did. Update: I can't believe what I'm about to share. My life, which seemed to be finally on the right track, took a dark and twisted turn. Here's what happened. After my dad passed away, things were relatively calm for a while. I threw myself into work in the gym, and I started to feel like I had a handle on things. But then, out of nowhere, my parents showed up at my doorstep. Well, my mom and my sister, the golden child of the family who had always been their pride and joy. They came in demanding, not asking, demanding that I hand over the rights to my app. They said that since they were my parents, they were entitled to it, and if that wasn't enough, they demanded $200,000 for the good treatment they gave me as a child. I was stunned. The audacity of it was mind-blowing. Of course, I refused. I told them that they had no right to my hard-earned success, especially given how they had treated me growing up. That when things escalated. My mom, with a venomous look in her eyes, told me that they would sue me for inequality, claiming they were entitled to a share of my earnings. True to their word, they did. They took me to court, dragging me through a 10-day trial. It was brutal. They painted me as an ungrateful child who had turned his back on his loving family. They claimed that without their support, I would have never achieved anything. Their lawyer was ruthless, twisting facts and trying to discredit everything I had built. But I had prepared well. I had a great lawyer who helped me present the truth. We brought in testimonies from people who knew the real story, from my therapist to my friends at the gym and my colleagues at FitTech. After 10 grueling days in court, I won the case. The judge ruled in my favor and even went so far as to strip my parents of any parental rights over me. It was a bittersweet victory. While I was relieved, the whole ordeal had left a bitter taste in my mouth. 5 months of quiet followed. I immersed myself in work and tried to move on. Then, one night, I was returning from the gym. It was late, probably around 11 p.m. The streets were quiet, and I was exhausted but content. As I approached my apartment building, I noticed a figure slumped against the wall. As I got closer, I realized it was my sister, Sarah. She was drunk, her hair disheveled, and her eyes bloodshot. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" I concerned and a bit wary. She staggered up, her movements unsteady. You ruined everything," she slurred. "You ruined Mom and Dad's life. You ruined my life." I tried to calm her down, but she was having none of it. The argument escalated quickly. She was incoherent, her words a mix of accusations and insults. Then she saw something on the ground, a metal bar that must have fallen from a construction site nearby. Before I could react, she picked it up and swung it at me. The first blow caught me off guard, hitting my ribs with a sickening crack. I fell to the ground, gasping for breath, the pain radiating through my body. She didn't stop. She hit me again and again, shouting that I had ruined everything, that I was a worthless piece of trash. I tried to shield myself, but she was relentless. I felt my arm snap under one of the blows, and I screamed in agony. In the heat of the moment, "You are not even our real brother. You are adopted. They should have never taken you in." Her words cut deeper than any blow. Adopted. The revelation was a shock, but I had no time to process it. I was losing consciousness, the pain overwhelming. Just as I thought she might actually kill me, a passerby heard the commotion and intervened. They managed to pull Sarah away and called 911. I woke up in the hospital, my body bruised and broken, my ribs were fractured, and my arm was in a cast. The doctors told me I was lucky to be alive. The police had arrested Sarah, and she was facing serious charges. As I lay in that hospital bed, I tried to piece together everything that had happened. The revelation that I was adopted haunted me. It explained a lot about my childhood, why I always felt like an outsider in my own family. But it also raised so many questions. Over the next few weeks, as I recovered, I started digging into my past. I managed to get access to my adoption records. It turned out that my biological parents had died in a car accident when I was a baby. I was taken in by my mom and dad, who, for whatever reason, never told me the truth. The shock of it all was overwhelming, but I realized that it didn't change who I was. I had built a life for myself despite everything, and I wasn't going to let this new information derail me. Sarah S. attack had left me physically scarred, but it also gave me a strange sense of closure. I realized I didn't owe my adoptive parents or Sarah anything. I had to focus on my own life, my own happiness. Months passed, and I slowly got back to my routine. FitTech was doing well, and my friends were a constant source of support. I even started dating someone new, a woman named Lisa, who was kind and understanding. But life had one more shock in store for me. One evening, as I was going through some old family photos, I found a letter hidden at the back of a drawer. It was from my biological mother, written just days before the accident. In it, she talked about how much she loved me and how she hoped I would grow up to be happy and strong, no matter what happened. Reading her words gave me a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. It was like she was speaking to me from beyond the grave, telling me that everything would be okay. I decided to honor her memory by living my best life, free from the shadows of my past. Update. The trial was set to be one of the most grueling and emotional experiences of my life. The courtroom itself felt imposing, with its high ceilings and stern wooden benches. My parents sat on one side, their faces hard and unyielding, while I took my place on the opposite side, flanked by my lawyer, Julia. The first day of the trial was all about opening statements. My parents' lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Mr. Kingston, started by painting a picture of a devoted, loving family. He argued that my parents had sacrificed so much to provide for me, and that they deserved compensation for their efforts and the financial strain they claimed to have endured. His rhetoric was polished, and he played to the emotions of the jury, making it seem like they were victims of my alleged ingratitude. Julia, my lawyer, was unflappable. In her opening statement, she laid out the truth of my upbringing, the neglect, the emotional abuse, and the lack of support. She highlighted my achievements despite my parents' treatment, not because of it. She emphasized that my success was due to my resilience and hard work, not their non-existent nurturing. Over the next few days, witnesses were called to the stand. My parents had lined up a series of character witnesses, distant relatives, old family friends, even a former teacher, all of whom attested to their supposed devotion and love. They spoke of family holidays, birthday parties, and other events that painted a rosy picture of my childhood. It was clear they had been coached to provide the most favorable narrative possible. Julia countered with her own witnesses. First was Dr. Emily Foster, my therapist. She spoke in detail about my sessions, the trauma I had experienced, and the deep psychological scars left by my parents, neglect, and emotional abuse. Her testimony was clinical yet compassionate, and it struck a chord with the jury. She presented a stark contrast to the idyllic image my parents' witnesses had tried to create. Next was Mike, my friend from the gym and co-founder of FitTech. He described my struggles and triumphs, highlighting my determination and the community I had built around me. He shared stories of our late-night brainstorming sessions, the hard work that went into our startup, and my relentless pursuit of success despite my tumultuous past. His testimony brought a sense of authenticity and relatability to my case. Throughout the trial, my parents remained stoic, but I could see the tension building in my sister Sarah. She sat behind them, her eyes boring into me with a mix of anger and frustration. As the days went on, her agitation grew more apparent. She fidgeted, whispered furiously to my parents, and glared daggers at me. The final day of the trial was the most intense. Mr. Kingston gave his closing arguments, reiterating the sacrifices my parents claimed to have made. He argued that they were entitled to a share of my success as compensation for their efforts. He appealed to the jury a sense of fairness, portraying me as an ungrateful son who had turned his back on his loving family. Julia's closing argument was powerful. She recapped the evidence of my parents' neglect and the emotional toll it had taken on me. She spoke passionately about my journey, the obstacles I had overcome, and the achievements I had earned through my own hard work and determination. She reminded the jury that my parents were not entitled to my success simply because they were my parents, especially given their lack of support and care. The jury deliberated for what felt like an eternity. When they finally returned, the tension in the room was palpable. The foreman stood and read the verdict in my favor. My parents' claims were dismissed, and the court ruled that they had no right to my app or any financial compensation. The judge went further, declaring that their actions had shown a severe lack of parental responsibility, effectively stripping them of any legal parental rights over me. As the verdict was read, Sarah lost control. She leapt up from her seat, trying to charge at me, but was restrained by court officers. In her struggle, she lashed out wildly, striking at me and breaking a bone in her already injured arm. Her screams echoed through the courtroom as she was handcuffed and taken away. The sight of her being let out, furious and broken, was a grim reminder of the deep-seated anger and dysfunction within my family. The trial's conclusion left me feeling a mix of relief and sorrow. While justice had been served, the events had laid bare the toxic relationships and unresolved issues that had plagued my life. The courtroom, once a place of judgment, had become a theater of familial disintegration. I walked out, battered but not beaten, ready to move forward with my life, free from the shadows of my past. Recovering from the physical and emotional wounds of my past was a long and arduous journey. After the trial, my body was still healing from the beating my sister Sarah had inflicted upon me. My ribs were fractured, and my arm was in a cast. Each day was a struggle, but I was determined to heal both physically and emotionally. I started with physical therapy. The sessions were grueling but necessary. The therapist, a kind yet firm woman named Karen, helped me through the pain. She guided me through exercises to regain strength and mobility in my arm and torso. At first, every movement was excruciating. The pain in my ribs made even the simplest tasks, like getting out of bed or reaching for a glass of water, feel monumental. Karen encouraged me to take things one step at a time. Her unwavering support and the progress I saw, no matter how small, kept me going. Slowly, the pain began to subside. My arm regained its strength, and my ribs healed. I started to feel like myself again, or at least a new version of myself, one that had endured and survived. While my body was mending, my mind needed healing too. I continued my therapy sessions with Dr. Foster. We talked about the trial, the trauma from my childhood, and the recent attacks. She helped me process the anger and betrayal I felt towards my family. Each session peeled back layers of pain and replaced them with understanding and acceptance. 5 months passed, and my wounds finally healed. I had regained full mobility and strength. The physical scars had faded, but the emotional scars were still present, albeit less raw. I found solace in my routine work at FitTech, workouts at the gym, and time spent with Lisa, my supportive and understanding girlfriend. One evening, after a particularly intense workout, I was walking back to my apartment when I sensed something was off. The streets were unusually quiet, and a sense of unease crept over me. As I approached my building, I saw a figure lurking near the entrance. My heart skipped a beat when I recognized Sarah. She looked disheveled and unhinged, her eyes wild with anger. Before I could react, she charged at me, shouting incoherent accusations. She swung at me, but this time I was ready. I dodged her blows and managed to pin her against the wall. My neighbors, alerted by the commotion, called the police. Within minutes, officers arrived and restrained her. She continued to scream and struggle, but they quickly took her into custody. Watching her being led away again was a harrowing sight. It seemed she hadn't learned anything from the previous ordeal. Determined to put an end to this madness, I decided to press charges. I couldn't live in fear of my own sister attacking me whenever she felt like it. The legal process was set in motion, and soon we found ourselves back in court. This trial was different from the last one. It was more about ensuring my safety and holding Sarah accountable for her actions. The prosecution laid out the facts: Sarah's history of violence, her recent attack on me, and her apparent instability. They painted a picture of a woman who was a danger not only to me, but to herself and others. Sarah's defense tried to argue that she was under immense stress and pressure, driven to her actions by desperation and emotional turmoil. They claimed that she needed help, not punishment. However, the evidence was overwhelming. Her repeated violent outbursts and the clear threat she posed could not be ignored. The trial lasted several days. The courtroom was tense, filled with a mix of curiosity and concern. Witnesses, including the police officers who had arrested Sarah, my neighbors who had witnessed the attack, and even Dr. Foster, testified about the impact of Sarah's actions on my life. During the closing arguments, the prosecutor emphasized the need for justice and protection. They argued that Sarah's actions could not be excused or tolerated. My safety and well-being were at stake, and the court needed to take decisive action. The defense tried to elicit sympathy, portraying Sarah as a victim of her own circumstances. But the jury saw through it. They understood that while Sarah might be struggling, it did not justify her violent behavior. The verdict was delivered swiftly. Sarah was found guilty of assault and was sentenced to a mental health facility where she would receive the treatment she so desperately needed. It was a bittersweet victory. I didn't want to see my sister suffer, but I also couldn't allow her to continue to hurt me. With the trial behind me, I felt a sense of closure. The legal battles had been draining, but they were necessary. I had stood up for myself, sought justice, and ensured my safety. It was a turning point in my life, a moment where I truly felt empowered and in control of my destiny. Life began to stabilize. The quiet months that followed allowed me to focus on my future. FitTech continued to grow, and our new products were receiving great reviews. The sense of accomplishment and purpose in my work was immensely satisfying. My relationship with Lisa deepened. She had been my rock through the trials, always there with a comforting word or a reassuring hug. We talked about the future, and for the first time I felt hopeful and excited about what lay ahead. Update. A few weeks after the trial concluded and Sarah was sentenced to a mental health facility, I received an unexpected visitor. It was my mother, looking more frail and worn than I had ever seen her. Her eyes were hollow, and her demeanor was one of desperation and anguish. I reluctantly let her into my apartment, uncertain of what to expect. As she stepped inside, she immediately broke down in tears, her sobs racking her body. It was a stark contrast to the cold and distant woman I had known all my life. She seemed smaller, almost broken, as if the weight of the recent events had crushed whatever strength she had left. She sat on my couch, clutching her hands together, her knuckles white from the pressure. She began to explain her visit in a voice that was barely more than a whisper. She told me that she had come to beg me to withdraw the lawsuit against Sarah. She painted a picture of Sarah's deteriorating mental state, describing her as a lost and fragile soul who needed family support more than institutionalized care. My mother pleaded for supervised treatment at home, arguing that it would provide a more nurturing and familiar environment for Sarah to heal. She proposed that Sarah could visit a psychotherapist regularly, and that the family would ensure she adhered to her treatment plan. My mother assured me that they would take full responsibility for Sarah's well-being, promising that they would do everything in their power to support her recovery. She insisted that this was the only way to truly help Sarah, to give her a chance at a normal life. As she spoke, her desperation became more palpable. She described the guilt and helplessness she felt, the sleepless nights spent worrying about Sarah. My mother painted a vivid picture of their home now, a place of sorrow and regret, filled with the echoes of a family broken by anger and violence. She begged me to consider the emotional and psychological toll Sarah's institutionalization would take on her, emphasizing that a home environment would be more conducive to healing. Then, her plea took a dark and alarming turn. My mother confessed that she could not bear the thought of losing Sarah to a mental health facility. She said that if I did not withdraw the lawsuit and agree to the proposed supervised treatment at home, she would end her own life. The threat of suicide hung in the air like a dark cloud, and the weight of her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Her eyes, filled with a mix of desperation and resolve, bore into mine, pleading silently for me to save her and Sarah. She described how she had already prepared, outlining in chilling detail the steps she would take if I did not comply. The image of my mother, once a figure of authority and strength, now reduced to making such a drastic threat, was both heartbreaking and terrifying. I felt a storm of emotions swirl inside me: anger, guilt, confusion, and sadness. The thought of my mother taking her own life was unbearable, and the pressure of her ultimatum weighed heavily on my shoulders. It was clear that she was at her breaking point, and the desperation in her voice left no doubt about the seriousness of her threat. As she sat there, tears streaming down her face, I realized that this decision would have far-reaching consequences. It was not just about Sarah's treatment, it was about the survival and well-being of my entire family. The burden of making such a decision felt overwhelming, and I knew that whatever choice I made would change the course of our lives forever. My mother eventually left, leaving me to grapple with the enormity of the situation. The apartment felt suffocating, and my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The threat of my mother's suicide loomed large, and the weight of her desperation pressed down on me. I knew that I had to find a way to navigate this difficult and complex situation, balancing the need for justice and protection with the desperate plea for family unity and support. Update. It's been a long journey since I last shared my story, and life has taken some unexpected turns. While I had hoped to restore some semblance of a relationship with my mother and sister, it became clear that it wasn't possible. The damage was too deep, and every attempt to reconnect only opened old wounds. Eventually, I had to make the tough decision to cut ties completely. For my own sanity and the well-being of my family, I forbade them from meeting me in court or contacting me in any way. It was painful, but necessary. On a brighter note, life with Lisa has been amazing. We got married in a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by close friends and colleagues. It was a beautiful day, filled with love and hope for the future. Lisa has been my rock through everything, and I couldn't have asked for a better partner. A year after our wedding, we welcomed our first son, Ethan. I can begin to describe the joy and awe of becoming a father. Holding him for the first time, I felt a rush of emotions: love, protectiveness, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. I was determined to be the kind of parent I never had, to give Ethan all the love and support he deserved. Watching Ethan grow has been an incredible experience. His first steps were a moment of pure magic. He was about a year old, and Lisa and I were playing with him in the living room. He had been pulling himself up on the furniture for weeks, and we knew it was only a matter of time before he started walking. That day, he let go of the coffee table, took a few wobbly steps towards Lisa, and then fell into her arms. We cheered and laughed, and the look of pride on his face was priceless. His first words were just as memorable. He had been babbling for months, and we eagerly awaited the day he would say something coherent. One morning, as I was making breakfast, he looked at me and said, "Dada." My heart melted. Lisa was equally thrilled when his second word turned out to be mama. Each new word he learned felt like a milestone, a small victory in the journey of parenthood. Ethan's curiosity and enthusiasm for life were infectious. He loved exploring the world around him, whether it was playing in the park, building with blocks, or trying to feed our dog, Max, his lunch. When it was time for him to start kindergarten, I was both excited and nervous. He was growing up so fast, and I wanted to make sure he had a positive experience. The first day of kindergarten was a big event. We dressed Ethan in his new school clothes and packed his lunch with all his favorite snacks. As we walked to the school, he held my hand tightly, his eyes wide with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Lisa and I reassured him that he would have a great time and make lots of new friends. When we arrived, he hesitated for a moment at the classroom door, but then he saw the colorful decorations and the friendly teacher, and he let go of my hand and walked in with a smile. Watching him interact with the other kids and find his place in the new environment was heartwarming. 4 years after Ethan was born, we welcomed another bundle of joy into our lives, our second son, Oliver. This time, the experience of becoming a parent was different but just as special. Ethan was thrilled to have a little brother. He was gentle and protective, always wanting to help with feeding and changing diapers. The bond between them was evident from the start. Oliver's first steps came a bit earlier than Ethan's. He was a determined little guy, always trying to keep up with his big brother. One day, when he was about 10 months old, he let go of the couch and took a few tentative steps towards Ethan, who was cheering him on. It was a beautiful moment of sibling connection, and I felt a surge of pride watching my boys grow and learn together. Oliver's first words followed a similar pattern. He was a quick learner, always mimicking his brother. His first word was Ethan, which he pronounced as Etan. Ethan was over the moon, and it created a special bond between them. Lisa and I loved watching their relationship develop. They played together, fought occasionally, and always had each other's backs. As Oliver grew, he showed a different personality than Ethan. Where Ethan was more cautious and thoughtful, Oliver was adventurous and fearless. He loved climbing anything he could, exploring every nook and cranny, and trying new things without hesitation. This kept us on our toes, but it also brought a lot of laughter and joy into our home. When it was time for Oliver to start kindergarten, Ethan took on the role of the protective older brother. He walked with Oliver to his classroom, showed him around, and introduced him to his friends. Seeing them support each other was one of the proudest moments of my life. They both thrived in school, each in their own way, and it was clear that they had a bright future ahead of them. Life continued with its ups and downs, but the love and support within our family kept us strong. FitTech grew steadily, and I found a balance between work and home life. Lisa and I made sure to spend quality time with the boys, going on family trips, playing games, and creating memories that would last a lifetime. Despite the happiness and fulfillment in my own family, there was always a lingering sadness about my estrangement from my mother and sister. I often wondered if things could have been different, but I knew that I had made the right choice for my own well-being and the safety of my family. The past was a painful chapter, but I had moved forward, creating a life filled with love and hope. Ethan and Oliver continued to grow, their personalities developing more distinctly with each passing year. Ethan became interested in science and technology, often asking to visit my office and learn about what we did at FitTech. He was curious and inventive, always coming up with new ideas and asking thoughtful questions. Oliver, on the other hand, showed a passion for sports and outdoor activities. He joined the local soccer team and spent hours practicing in the backyard, his energy and enthusiasm boundless. As they entered their teenage years, the challenges changed, but the bond within our family remained strong. Lisa and I navigated the ups and downs of parenting teenagers, always striving to provide a supportive and loving environment. We encouraged them to pursue their passions and supported them through their struggles, celebrating their successes and helping them learn from their failures. As I sit here, reflecting on my life, I feel a deep sense of gratitude. Despite the hardships, I have been blessed with a loving family, a successful career, and the strength to overcome my past. Life is far from perfect, but it's mine, and I am proud of the person I've become and the family we've built. Thanks for being there, Reddit. Sharing my story with you has been a therapeutic journey, and I hope it can inspire others to keep pushing forward no matter how tough things get. Here's to the future, with all its uncertainties and possibilities. Last update, I wanted to share more about Lisa, my incredible wife. We met in university, where her calming presence and empathy drew me in. She is beautiful, with wavy brown hair and green eyes, but it's her warmth and kindness that truly stand out. Lisa is a blend of strength and softness, always thinking of others and volunteering at shelters. She has been my rock through the toughest times, encouraging me to seek therapy and supporting me every step of the way. As a mother, Lisa is amazing. She is patient, nurturing, and always engaged with our sons, Ethan and Oliver. Her adventurous spirit and willingness to try new things have enriched our lives. Despite the challenges, our relationship thrives on open communication and teamwork. Our wedding day was perfect, symbolizing our love and commitment. Lisa's support has helped me balance my career and family life. She is more than my wife, she is my partner, confidant, and best friend. Together, we've built a life filled with love, laughter, and hope, and I look forward to all our future adventures.